Welcome back everyone to another Technicoding programming tutorial. In this video, we're going to be continuing our iOS authentication handling project. Specifically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be hooking up all of the navigation for our app. We're going to finish creating the other three screens that we have in this project: the login, the registration, and the actual screen that you land on after you log in. And we're going to be using the UIKit coordinator pattern. Now, again, I mentioned this in the previous video. We're going to be going over everything in programmatic UIKit first. The reason being, most existing projects are all on UIKit. They usually are sprinkling in SwiftUI, but legacy projects are still using UIKit, so it's very important to still know that. And then after that, depending on how much time we have left, I might continue on with that, but the goal of this video is primarily just to set up the navigation, show you the coordinator pattern, and give you a little bit of a taste on what like a production level app, as far as it as the coordinator pattern is involved, looks like. Without further ado, let's get started in it. So let me go to the project here. So the main goal, just real quick recap, this is the end goal here. So we want to be able to have a login screen. If we submit credentials, it goes to this screen, which you can fetch you can fetch a string from a secured endpoint using the auth token. You can reset it and fetch it again, and then you can log out. And we also have this registration screen right here. Now, last time we finished off with our login view controller right here. We went over some boilerplate. So we created UI view extensions, which houses auto layout function helpers here. Let me minimize some of this stuff so we can see it a little bit better. So just some utility methods to help us out when it comes to creating and pinning views to screens and setting up constraints in UIKit programmatically. You can go back to the previous video on this, and I explained why we want to do it in programmatic views in UIKit versus storyboards. Just a quick recap. Usually storyboards have a large amount of pain points when working on a team. Programmatic UIKit is much easier to work with on a team. Also, what we left off with is me showing you that UIKit actually now has UIKit previews. So just like in SwiftUI, UIKit now has the same ability to look at and see previews of the screens that we create inside of our view controllers. It's going to take a second here to finish building, but this makes UIKit much easier to dive into because you can actually see what's going on if you want to target the usage of programmatic views. And here you go. So we have this view right here with the login controller, and going back, we have these nice helper methods to help us out. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to continue creating the rest of this view, and then I'm going to be making the home screen and the register screen, and then we're going to dive right into the coordinators that we have, the nav coordinators here. There's only going to be one, but let's go through and finish these screens up, and then we can move on to that. So the next thing that I want to do when it comes to this is I just need to add more fields to this screen. So we already have the register, email, password, submit button, and register button all created right here. And I can close down the SwiftUI previews so we can see a little bit better. And these were just the helper methods that we saw with inside the UI button extensions, the text field extensions, text extensions, and we did create a UI view controller extension to just show a quick UI alert controller, just the alert pop-up. In any case, let's continue. So since I have all those fields already created up here at the top, what we can do is we can just keep adding more to the screen. So in real time, what I'll do is I'll open up the previews, and I'll say password text field dot add to the current view. The view controller view controller's view, the root view of this screen, we're going to center X on the current view. Nope, come on. There we go. We're going to say pin the top to the email text field dot bottom anchor. So we want the top of this one to be right at the bottom of the email field right there. And it's nice, we can actually just see it. Let's see, then we say set default field size in relation to the root view of this controller. Cool. So there's one thing we want to do, and we added this into our helper methods here. Constant. We want it to be separated by 10 points. And I got to spell that right for it to work. Cool. So now we have this new password field. So we're going to continue, and we're going to say submit button dot add to the current view, center X on the current view, in the top to the password text field dot bottom anchor with the same constant of 10, and now we have a submit button. Okay, now we need the registration button. Register button dot add to view dot center X on the view, and then pin bottom to anchor view dot. Now we're going to use safe area layout guide here dot bottom anchor. Now what this is inside UIKit, there's this frame in here, or I should say this layout guide essentially. And the safe area is any area that doesn't overlap with a system action or control. So an example of that would be the home indicator on any iPhone that doesn't have a home button, like a physical home button. So a little home indicator that looks like a bar. The safe area is just on top of that. So UIKit has this nice thing called Safe Area Layout Guide that it avoids anything on the screen, including the dynamic. Let me finish this out here so we can actually see here. So the dynamic island is an example of that, or a notch is an example of a part of the phone that you don't want anything like overlapping with. So the safe area represents that. What's cool about the safe area is if you rotate the phone, wherever you pin the views to, if it's to the safe area, it will still avoid those system things, even if you rotate the phone. So it's kind of like a smart layout guide. So we don't want our register button to overlap with that home action indicator down here. So we pin this view above the safe area layout guide's bottom anchor. So this is going to pin just above it. And we say -10 because if we say 10, it's going to actually push it down. We say -10 to push it up. You can play around with this in your own code to kind of see what I'm talking about there. If you want it to be a positive number, basically what we would do is we would reverse the constraints and say that the bottom safe area layout guide's bottom anchor is 10 pixels away from this instead. So you'd have to reverse the way we add the constraint to that. But that's it. That's all we have to add. Like, it's a little bit more verbose than SwiftUI for sure, but once you have these added helper methods in here, it's really not that bad. It can get pretty complex, but SwiftUI I have seen is just faster. Unless you have extremely complex views, then UIKit's the way to go. But at the very least, I wanted to show everyone that UIKit is actually really not a scary beast if you have never seen it before. You have to work with it. And it just, over time, it gets a lot easier. And now that we have these preview screens in here, you can just avoid using storyboards altogether, which is really nice. So that's it. We've got our view for the login view controller. So now what I want to do is I want to come back in here and I want to add a new group, and we're going to call it the home screen, well, the home group. Then I'm going to add a new file. It's going to be a new Swift file. We're going to call it home view controller. And boop, Okay, so you say UIKit class home view controller, going to be a UI view controller. Okay, so now we do the thing that I like to do every single time, and that is organize this out. So I always have a couple areas in this, and I mentioned this in the previous video. I have one for all the life cycle methods. And I also have one for setting up all the views. And this can actually be private. And we are gonna have more in here. One of them we're gonna have is for actions. And then just so we get started on this, we're gonna add the preview code here. Again, these UIKit previews are only for Xcode 15 for iOS 17 builds and up. If your project targets anything below iOS 17, these are not going to work. So we're going to say return home view controller, just like that. And of course, when it builds, it's not going to show anything because we haven't actually added anything to this screen. So the first thing I'm going to do is we need to add our views to this. So, okay, let me open this up a little bit here. Private lazy var info text equals UI text view dot make text view. Okay, so this screen looks like this. So this is our aim right here. So what we're gonna do, so this info text is that text that's gonna change and tell us what we received from the backend when we fetch a piece of text from the secure endpoint. Private lazy var fetch data button UI button dot make button fetch secure data. Target's going to be self. The action is going to be a selector, and we're going to make a function called onFetchTapped. Spell it right here. We're going to make these functions after we're done defining these views. Private lazy var reset button equals UI button dot make button reset text self. Again, if you don't know UIKit, when you say the target is self, you're saying that there is a function. There's a function named onFetchTapped on the object of self. Target just means what object does this function actually live on. And the selector, this is a fancy way of defining a function reference. So that's why we're not actually calling the parentheses. Went over this a bit in the last video, but just as a refresher, that's what it is. So we're going to say self dot on reset text tapped private lazy var logout button. No, there we go. Log out, target self. We're going to say self.on log out tapped. Cool. Okay, so now that that is all done, it's going to complain about all this stuff because we haven't actually made any of these functions. So we're going to say at Objective-C, and these selectors. This is all Objective-C code in the background underneath the hood, essentially. So these functions that we add to the selector, they all have to be marked as Objective-C functions, so they're visible from the Objective-C side. So that's why we label them as Objective-C. So we're going to say on func on fetch tapped. Also, these functions, they can actually take in a button. There's always a UI view passed into the caller of this. So, but we don't need that. We can actually omit this altogether. Just as a quick heads up, if you want a reference to that button that's actually being tapped, that's a way to do it. If you add the UI button to this, and it has to be a nameless parameter too, meaning that you put a little underscore before this, so you don't actually have to use a parameter name right there. You just name it whatever you want, and this will pass in the button every time it's tapped. So you can add these selectors to multiple different buttons, and then when you pass in the button, you can, figure out which button it came from based on the reference it passes in. So we got that. So now we need to, and these are just placeholders for right now too. cfunc on reset text tapped. And object cfunc on logout tapped. Okay. Switch should stop complaining now. Great. So next thing we want to do is we want to start our view setup code, and I'm going to actually go in and say func setup views. I had to add the code folding ribbon right here. So now what we want to do is we want to call this from the view did load setup views. Oop, there we go. So again, I like to set up all of these consistently with different extensions, and all of my view controllers are always set up the exact same way. One thing I like to tell my junior devs when I teach them on how to build really more easily readable projects is, if you don't know how to set up the project correctly, be consistent in everything you do. Now, the reason for that is if you're consistent in everything you do, once you find a fix, it's the same fix across the entire code base, rather than trying to figure it out on each screen. Okay, in any case, now we need to add our views. So let's go into our previews here, and there should still be nothing on the screen. And we're going to say title equals home. So this is going to show up in the navigation area when it's embedded in a navigation controller. We're going to say view.background color equals .white for good measure. Even though it's white here, we're just being safe. We're going to say info text dot add to view dot center on view. So this is going to be centered horizontally and vertically on this view. Set default field size on the view, and we should see something on screen, and we are not seeing anything right now. And that's probably because we don't actually have anything set on this, because there is no text. So what we're going to do real quick is we're going to say dot text info text dot text equals and then we should see something. Boom, right there. Cool. And it's a little, it scrolls a little bit because we are wrapping the text on there. Okay, so now we want to add the other views here. So we have fetch data button dot add to the current view dot center X on the current view, and we want this to be below the last view that we had, info text dot bottom anchor constant 10, so it's separated by 10 points. Now we want the reset button, add a little space here, dot add to current view center X on the current view dot pin top to the fetch data button. So it's going to be right below. And we're going to give it some space. We're going to say 25 pixels, or sorry, points. It's important to say points here, and this is probably going to yell at me because I did something wrong here. Dot bottom anchor. Aha. Cool. So we separated just a little bit so you don't accidentally hit that. We got one last view. Log out button. Dot add to the current view. Dot center X on the current view. And then pin bottom to the current view dot safe area layout guide, again what we did in the last view, and we're going to say -10 again to be consistent. So there, that's the screen. So if I pull this back in, there it is. Not too shabby. Okay, so that's it. That home view is done. So now we have the register view to go through. So what I'll do is I'll make a new group, register, and I want to clean this up a little bit here. Sort by name. There we go. Say new file, Swift file. And we're going to speed right through this. Can't spell today. There we go. Thank you, autocomplete. Okay, so now we need our actions that we're going to use. You might be wondering again why I don't have the actions as private. Because, and also lifecycle as private, is because both of these use Objective-C related code in the background. And you can't have Objective-C related code in Swift extensions. So that's why I have that there. Okay, so real quick, let's do it in reverse. Let's make the actions first. So we're going to say onRegister tapped. And one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's see what this screen looks like real quick. So this is the target here. We've got our email, password, confirm password, register, and login. All in all, pretty straightforward, pretty simple. So let's do onRegister tap there. Objective-C func on login tapped. And that's it. Okay, so now we're going to come back up here and we're going to start making the views. Private lazy var email text field equals UI text field dot make email field. Private lazy var password text field equals text field dot make password field. So this is where all of the boilerplate we did in the last video really comes to shine. Password field. I'm going to give this a custom placeholder called confirm password. So if you can't recall, this password field, if I go to it real quick, we set a default title as password right here. So I don't need to add that to the original password field. Actually, what I can do is, if I go back to the login controller, I already have a register button here. So I can copy that right into this. Of course, this is going to say on register tapped, and it's the same, so we don't have to rename it. And private. And let's give some more space here so everything shows on screen. Cool. Okay, so now what we have to do is we have to override the viewDidLoad. So we can call our setup method. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this for some space. I'm going to also close this, and we're going to focus on here. Now, we're going to add the previews window here. We're going to say return, register view controller, and then we're going to open up previews. And then it's going to build for a second and then show us a blank screen because, again, nothing's on there. All right, so now we're going to go run through this. We're going to say title equals register, view.background color equals .white for good measure. Then we're going to say email text field .add to view .center on the view. So this one's going to be directly in the center, and you can also already see it rendering right there. And we say .set default field size on the current view, and that should expand. Perfect. Okay, so now we're going to say password text field .add to the current view. We're going to say center X on the current view, pin top to email text field bottom anchor, and we're nope, hitting the wrong things on the keyboard here. 10 pixels, points, 10 points. And then we're going to say set default field size again. Boom, cool, email password. Now I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to say confirm password text field, and we got to change this to password text field. And now I have my confirm password field. So it's just, again, just copy and paste, boom, done, we're good. Now I need actually I can copy this right here and then say register button. Then we're going to change this to confirm password text field. And now we have a register button. And I'm going to copy this one more time. And we're going to do login button. And we're going to say pin bottom this time to that view.safe area layout guide. And then again, it's going to be -10. We're done. That's it. That's the home screen right there. So now we have all three screens all set up. So now what we're going to do is I'll just get right into the navigation. So when it comes to coordinators, there's a couple things that I do. First off, every single app has a root coordinator. Essentially what a coordinator is, it's an object that only handles navigation. That's it. I personally go a little bit outside that box as well, and I also put in any kind of like configuration code that needs to occur before you instantiate a view controller. So if you need to create a view model and then inject it into the view controller, I do that in the coordinator. Tends to be a little bit more readable that way. There are some libraries that may do things differently that will auto inject things in there, but I'm a little bit more of a purist when it comes to code, so I don't use libraries for that. I do everything inside the coordinator. To give you a broad overview of what a coordinator actually is, a coordinator represents one flow. So it's an object that represents one flow of the app. So you will have a root one at the very top, which is the application coordinator, and then you'll have small coordinators that represent a flow for the rest of the app. So off of the app coordinator, you would have a little method in there that says, hey, if the user was logged in, then start the dashboard flow, or the main flow, I usually call it. If they're not, start the auth flow. And the main flow would be represented by a main coordinator. And you might have sub coordinators off of that, such as maybe an upgrade coordinator that takes you down the path of showing like the upgrade screens. And the auth coordinator would represent just the auth flow. So the registration, login, forgot password screens, any activation screens, that would all be wrapped up inside that coordinator. And that coordinator's job would be to just show and navigate between those screens. And then it would navigate back up and say, if I am done showing those screens, then tell the parent coordinator that I'm done. And the parent coordinator's job would be to close down that flow and then to navigate to a different one. So that's in a nutshell. In this video, we're only going to have one coordinator because we only have 3 screens. There's really no reason to go through all that. In a future video down the road, I'm going to show a more complex app that has these flows to give you an idea of what's going on. But for right now, we're just going to have one coordinator, which is going to be the application coordinator. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, make that coordinator. I started calling them nav coordinators. The reason I started calling them nav coordinators is because I believe there's a Swift UI object called coordinator that's unrelated to navigation. So I started calling these nav coordinators to be a little bit more clear on what's going on. So when it comes to these, there's a let's UIKit. There's a bunch of different ways to actually implement these, but we're gonna keep it as slim as possible. So we're gonna say class AppNavCoordinator, and it's gonna get a little bit more complex as we add the business logic layers too. Say let window UI window. We're gonna say var presenter UI navigation controller, and we're gonna say init window UI window. Then we're gonna say self dot window self dot presenter equals UI navigation controller presenter dot view dot background color equals dot white. Man, I'm doing this all over the place. It's fine. Window dot root view controller equals presenter, and then we're going to say window dot make key invisible, and I actually have to call that instantiate it. Okay, so you might remember this code right here from our app delegate right here. It's the exact same code. The only difference is we are handling this now in our AppNavCoordinator, the root coordinator. So this is actually really nice because now what we can do is we can move all of this code out of here and clean up the app delegate. I've seen app delegates that are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lines of code for all this configuration. Personally, I like moving as much out of the delegate as possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to say var AppNavCoordinator, AppNavCoordinator. And we're going to force unwrap this because it's the first thing we're going to set in this project. So we're going to say, we're going to keep the window. And we also have to keep it up here because this actually is a property that's defined in, I believe, the UI application delegate. So we still have to have this here. So window, and we're going to say AppNavCoordinator equals AppNavCoordinator. We're going to give it the window object, and we're going to say we have one last thing to do inside the AppNavCoordinator, and we want to unwrap this just like that. Inside the AppNavCoordinator, we're going to have a function called start. And then we're going to have a func We're going to say log out, just like that. And then I'm going to have another extension here. I'm going to call this showing screens extension AppNavCoordinator. We have a function named show home screen. We have one named show registration screen. Show login screen. We're going to implement these here in a second. I'm going to leave them right just like this. Now what we're going to do is, so right now basically we're just going to show the home screen, show login screen, just to show something on screen, right? What this is going to change into, to give you a little bit of foreshadowing here, is eventually we're going to say if is logged in, show home screen, else show login screen. So going back on what I said about coordinators, this would then show or start the main coordinator. This would then start the auth coordinator. So you see how navigation is really easy to view now, because it's literally just statements saying, if this logic is true, open this flow. If it's not, open the other flow. And all of your navigation logic is in one spot, so you can more easily dive in and understand what's going on. So this is why I personally like the UI coordinator pattern way better than anything else, even in Swift UI. Real quick before I move back into the app delegate here, this start method right here, the coordinator pattern, at least the one that I use, mandates that every single coordinator have two things. One, a presenter. This presenter is going to be used to show every single screen within the flow. Now you can create presenters and then add them of different types to sub coordinators or any other coordinator. It doesn't have to be a UINavigationController. This is just the most commonly used one. But this is what's going to be used to handle all of the stack, the navigation stack. And the second thing that every coordinator has is a start method. The caller shouldn't care what that coordinator does. Every single coordinator should just have a start, and each coordinator is in charge of handling whatever views it's supposed to show from within its own start method. So those are the two requirements from every single coordinator. You can customize it as needed after that, but this is like the basics on that. So let me go back to the app delegate, and now that that's done, we can say AppNavCoordinator.start. We're done. So that is the basics of coordinator. So now we have an object that the app delegate passes control to. It has a reference to the window, so this stays in memory. It would have already been in memory because the app delegate still has the window object. We also want to keep and make sure the AppNavCoordinator stays in memory and doesn't get deallocated, which is why we put a variable on the app delegate that stores the AppNavCoordinator. So after we instantiate this, it's going to create the presenter here. It's going to set the background color on the presenter, and then it's going to actually show this presenter on screen. After that, once we call the start method is then going to add screens to that presenter. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down here to the show login screen. We're going to say let controller equals login view controller. And then we're going to say presenter dot set view controllers controller animated false. Now we could have pushed this on the screen. The only downside to that is there's a chance the user could actually see an animation once they open the screen. And since this is going to be the first screen and the root screen in the navigation stack, we're just going to set it instantly so the user doesn't see any kind of like animations. So that's what we're doing here. We might as well do the same thing for these too. So we're going to say let controller equals home view controller presenter dot set view controllers to controller animated false. Let's see here for this one. Do we want to say true? Here's what we want to do. So the reason I'm doing this is because when we go back and forth between the different, actually I could probably just remove this altogether and just say true for the animations. That should be fine. We'll see how this works. We'll change this if needed, if they actually see a animation on there. But what you'll notice is in UIKit, when you set view controllers, this is replacing the entire navigation stack on the UINavigationController. But what's nice about UIKit is when you set the animation to true, even if you're resetting the entire stack, you still get a nice animation that either pops or pushes to replace the current view on screen. So you don't get like a jarring like flash if animation is animated is set to true. All right, so we're gonna say let controller equal register view controller presenter dot push view controller true. All right, so this is the only one we're actually gonna push on the screen. We're gonna have a push and pop because we're gonna show this from the home screen. So again, if I show you real quick the end result here, what we're going to be doing is you get login. So this is the login screen. When we hit register, we have this little back button here, right? So we have the opportunity push and pop. So this is a push animation and a pop animation. Now, when I hit login right there, because it's not using that back button, you saw that little animation was different. So if I go back to the login screen right here, if I hit register and the back button, you see how the screen moves to the right when I hit the back button. But if I hit this login button, what it's going to do, because we are setting the view controller, we're resetting the view controller stack, it's a different animation. It's going to slide in from the right. So when I click on this register button, it's going to push the view controller on. The back button is default, built into the iOS UIKit system. So it automatically pops it without you having to actually write any code. Register, login, and the login has a different animation. So real quick overview on what's going on between these right here. Log out, we're just going to show login screen. And the start method, we're showing the login screen too. So log out, this method is in one single spot because we're going to do other things in this method, such as clean up data. Clear out any user defaults, any kind of cleanup code with data, and then you show the login screen at the very end. So that should be it. We should be able to run this now. So let's just run this guy real quick. We're not going to be able to navigate around yet, but what we are going to be able to do is we're going to be able to see something on screen. Okay, so we've got our app right here. So again, we can't really navigate anywhere. We haven't hooked up any of these actions yet. But we do have our screen up and running here. So we've got our fields right here. So we're good to go. We have our login title. So now the next step is to hook up the actual navigation. So let me close out some of these screens here. So what we need to do is in each one of our view controllers, we're going to use the delegate pattern here. So within each one of our controllers, we're going to declare that like untapped actions when it comes to navigation. And then within a protocol, and I usually name them the same name as these view controllers here, but we're gonna essentially build protocols and then have the AppNavCoordinator adhere to those protocols, and then the AppNavCoordinator is going to act as the nav quote unquote delegate for each screen. So then each screen will relinquish control for navigation up to the AppNavCoordinator. It's going to be easier once I start making it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize all of this code. I'm going to close previews, and I'm going to also close this area right here to give a better idea of what's going on here. And then we're going to want our actions open. So inside the home view controller, the only thing inside this one that we have, because it's just one screen with the logout button when it comes to navigation, is we're just going to have a logout tapped. So we're going to say protocol home nav delegate any object. We're going to say func on logout tapped. Now we have to add the object here. We say week var nav delegate, and it's going to be of type home nav delegate. Okay, so what am I doing here with week? So basically, if you're not familiar with week, what this does is it says, hey, this object does not own whatever object is passed in or set here. It's setting a weak reference to it. So it's avoiding a strong reference cycle. So if another object, for instance, so if this object had a direct relation, or if this was not weak, the AppNavCoordinator may never get deallocated, and it may cause a strong reference cycle. So that's why we're adding it as weak. You want every single one of your nav delegates to be weak. It's just rule of thumb, they're all going to be weak. You don't have to remember why or what have you. I would personally remember and understand that. Look into strong reference cycles and the issues with those. But we are saying weak here. So now we can come down to on logout tapped and say nav delegate dot on logout tapped. So it's saying, hey, when the user taps on the logout button, we're going to call the on logout tapped on the delegate that is handling navigation for this controller. Back in the AppNavCoordinator, now if I minimize this area and I minimize this right here, we're going to create a new extension. I'm going to call this home nav delegate. Extension AppNavCoordinator home nav delegate. It's always nice to organize your extension, your delegates with the adherence to the delegate, the actual object on the extension itself. It's a really easy way to like navigate around, because if you come up here to this navigation pane, you can just directly correlate with that little mark, this mark right here, to the actual extension that handles the delegate functions. So right now we're going to say func on logout tapped, and when the logout tapped is, well, tapped, we're going to say logout, and I got to spell that right, logout. There it is. So now what we have to do is inside our showing screens here, where is it, login, we have to say, or that was home, controller.navDelegate equals self. Okay, so just real quick, here's the whole cycle here. So when we show the home screen, we are creating the object and we're saying, hey, the navigation delegate is the AppNavCoordinator self. When the home view controller or someone taps the actual logout button, it's going to call back up to here, and then it's going to call the logout, and it's then going to show the login screen. So all of our navigation is now pinned inside this object, and you can follow the flow through the code itself. So that is the home nav delegate. We have to do the same thing for the other two screens here. So if I hit Command Shift O, I can open up the login screen, now login view controller, just like that. I use these quick methods to navigate around. It's much easier to do it that way. Again, it was Command Shift O to open up this little quick area, so you can start typing in the file name you need, and then you can open it up by double clicking on it. Super nice when you're working on big projects. So we're going to do the same thing here, and in this scenario we're going to have two methods, and I'm going to minimize some stuff here to make things easier on us. Okay, so we're going to say protocol login nav delegate. It's going to be any object. Might be asking yourself, why any object? Well, when we say week var nav delegate, login nav delegate. We cannot use weak on protocols that are not of an object. And if I wait a second, you'll see this error that comes up. Weak must not be applied to a non-class bound any login delegate. So in order to say that this delegate has to be adopted only by classes, you have to say any object. And now we fix that issue. So inside this, we're going to say on register tapped and func on login successful. We're not going to be using this one yet. This is going to be later down the road when we actually handle the network requests when it comes to this, when it comes to actually sending out a login request. So, but now that we have that, we can go down to the actions. We can say on register tapped, and we can say nav delegate on register tapped. And submit tapped, we are not going to add, we could say it now, I guess. Nav delegate dot on login successful. So at the very least, if we click on the button, we can navigate around and we can show you the full navigation without actually having to deal with any network requests right now. Okay, so now we have one more to do, and that is the registration. So again, Command Shift O brings up this nice little handy window here. I'm going to enter for the register view controller. We're going to minimize everything here. And for this one, we are going to do protocol register nav delegate the object func on registration complete. This is another one of those methods that will be called after a network request is successful. Func on login tapped. And we've got to add the property weak var nav delegate register nav delegate. And now we can go down to the actions, say on register tapped nav delegate dot on registration complete nav delegate dot on login tapped. Again, just as a recap, this will actually be called after a network request. We're just doing it here for navigation reasons. Okay, so our screens are done, but we have to come back up to the app coordinator and set the other couple up here as well. So inside the areas where we're creating the view controllers, we have to say, first off, let me do this first. Let me come down and do extension AppNavCoordinator, and we'll say login nav delegate, and I'll copy this. I'll say mark, and I'll say the extension AppNavCoordinator register nav delegate. Okay, so with the register nav delegate, we're going to say func on register on registration complete. I'm going to say func on login tapped, right? And then in the login nav delegate, we're going to say func on register tapped, func on login successful. Okay, so that now that we have a lot of these set up, what we can do is we can say on register tapped, we're going to say show registration screen. When the login is successful, we're going to say show home screen. Another thing we could do here, because once login is successful, we should actually have everything we need to tell the system that we're logged in. We could eventually, when the start method checks to see whether or not we're logged in, to take you down the correct path, we could also just say, call the start method again. Sorry, down here. We could just say right here, once the login is successful, just recall the start method. Usually a little bit safer because it'll just to do one more double check to see if the user is logged in and everything was handled successfully, which is probably what we're going to do later in this course. Okay, so now that that's done, we can say when the registration is complete, we're going to say show. Actually, for this one, what we could do is we could say presenter.popViewController. True. So because this registration controller, if we go down the showing screens, is pushed, when it's done, we can just pop it. So we can say presenter.popViewController. So it just leads back to the login screen. When the login is tapped, we could, well, presenter dot popViewController again. Or we could just say show login screen. Again, the differences between these two are the same that I showed on the actual app itself. It's just a matter of animation. So it's going to do the exact same thing, but it's going to be animated differently. So when we're popping it, the screen's going to show. So if I hit the register button, so we're on the registration screen, and if I pop it, it's going to show with this animation right here. But if I say show login screen, if I click on this, it's going to have the animation coming in from the right-hand side. It's just a difference in animation. It depends on what you want. Now, on this version of the app, I actually had it this way to show you the differences. But in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to use the pop method on both of them because it's a little bit more consistent between the two. And that's it. So the last thing we got to do before we're actually done, and this is it. Like after that's done, our navigation is set. The only thing we have to do in the future is just have the check to see whether or not the user is logged in yet or not. But the last thing we have to do is actually give each of these controllers the nav delegate, or tell it what the nav delegate is. Controller.navDelegate equals self. And we're going to run this again. And now if I hit submit, we're in the home screen. If I hit log out, we'll go back to the login screen. If I hit register, we're in the register screen. The pop gestures work just fine. And the login brings us back to the login screen using a pop gesture. There you go. That's the coordinator pattern. It's honestly, it's a little weird when you first start working in UIKit because Apple doesn't really tell you other than using segues on how to do navigation. But having everything in an app coordinator, what ends up happening is everything just becomes a lot more organized and it starts to make a lot of sense. And not to mention, you can plug and play. So unlike in Swift UI, UIKit coordinators, you can just add to a different view really quick. So you would just instantiate a coordinator inside the coordinator that owns a different flow, and you're done. You're done. In Swift UI, you have to be a little bit more declarative because it's a declarative tool set, which is fine in some areas, but I personally enjoy the UIKit coordinators. You can do Swift UI coordinators. They're a lot better, especially with the new navigation. I believe it's navigation stack, but UIKit just holds a special place in my heart for how easy and viewable it is. But that's it. We have our navigation. And in the next video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting to create the boilerplate for all of our business logic. So we're going to be doing the network layer. We're going to be creating the different layers of the business logic, and we're going to be working with the one thing that you use to store your auth tokens, which is keychain. So we're going to be going through all of that stuff. And after that, pretty much all we have to do is start making calls, and we're done. So only 1 or 2 more videos, and we're good to go. But that's it for this video. I hope you learned a lot. Let me know in the comments if you want to see anything else or if you want me to explain anything else, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy coding.